Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Looks like we got a few folks here already. So welcome to today's session hosted by Accord. We're going to be talking about how to build and document a repeatable sales process that any CRO would admire. So we're talking all things high growth startup sales, how to build the process in the first place, how to make it repeatable, reinforce it across your team. And we're joined by a rock star group of folks. Maybe I'll kick things off and introduce myself, and we can go around. Let's maybe in alphabetical order by first name. But yeah, I'm Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord, which is sponsoring this event. We are a customer collaboration platform for B2B sales, onboarding, and success. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. But today we're talking about, not about Accord, but building a repeatable sales process. So I'll hand it off to Michaela, the first person on our awesome panel today, who has amazing experience in this, to introduce herself.
Yes, thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. I'm Michaela Samus. I'm a solutions engineer at Front. I've been there a little over a year and a half. Before that, I spent nearly 4 years at Salesforce. And just as a little icebreaker, one of the best things that happened to me today is first being here with all of you. Super excited to chat. And it's a beautiful day out here in Colorado.
Cool. Hi, everyone. This is Sid. I've known Ross and Ryan and the Accord team for many years now, so it's very honored to have got the call to join Tom and Michaela on the session today. Quick background on myself. Most of my background has been scaling companies from very early stage revenue to about the 10 to 20 million ARR mark. So I was a first sales hire at DocSend for 3 years or so. They recently got acquired by Dropbox. And most recently, I was at Tray for the last 3 years, where I helped launch and scale up their developer product line, which we grew from about 0 to a little bit over 10 million ARR in about 2 years or so. So that's kind of my background. Very, very excited for the session today and hope to get to meet a lot of you.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name's Tom Hemmingsen. Very, very excited to be here, Ross. Thanks for having us. Honored to be with Michaela and Sid, two rock stars. For myself, I've had a number of different roles throughout my career in sales. Have been obviously SDR, AE, have led a sales development organization, have managed AEs directly, and then now kind of lead a sales development and account executive teams, 2 teams at Five9, where we provide cloud contact center software. Before Five9, I was at 2 more like one pre kind of seed stage company and another that was Series A and Series B. It was Talkdesk. And then before that, a small company called Storybox. So very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the quick intros. As you can tell from hearing everyone's background on the panel, we got some awesome folks with a ton of experience in especially the early stages of building and documenting a repeatable sales process. So maybe to kick things off, before we get too tactical and talking about the subject here, would love to throw out just, what does building a repeatable sales process mean, and how much does that depend on the stage of the company? So maybe I'll pass it off to Sid to kick things off here for, so what does this really mean? What does building a repeatable sales process mean to you? And how much of that depends on where the company is at in terms of stage?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think of sales processes is, especially in early stage, from A to C or C to C, which is where most of my experience has been. I think that the way that I kind of think about it is you're basically trying to set up a machine, right, to where your inputs are leads or discovery calls, and your outputs ideally are close to 1 ARR. And, so everything that happens between is the sales process, right, obviously. And I think what's really started to change in the last 4 or 5 years is that it's less about the sales process ending once the deal is done, but the sales process is something that happens every single day, right? Because you got your renewals and it's easier than ever to switch to another competitor. And so you're always selling every email, every point of contact you have with the customer is a journey on that sales process, right? It's not, in my opinion, it's not just the AE or the CSM that's selling it, it's everybody. And so for me, like that's kind of how we've always built the organizations I've been at. And I think it definitely does change based off of the stage in terms of what does that process look like? I see a lot of times, like some of the founders that I've gotten a chance to work with closely at companies I've been at and some that I've advised, where they're doing founder-led sales or trying to build sales processes really early. And sometimes I think that there is such a thing as building a process too early, right? If you're building a cookbook without actually really knowing what the recipe is going to look like or how it turns out, it could be a recipe for disaster if you build that, train 10 people on it, and then realize it all doesn't work, and then have to retrain people on something else, right? And so I think it's really, really important to make sure that the process is actually the right process early on before you call it the process, right? And so it should just be a lot about experimentation, trying different things, trying different pricing models, trying different pricing levers, trying different ways of getting deals done, and seeing how customers are reacting to that. And only once you're seeing that, for me, my magic number is like 20 or 30 customers. Once it's been successful around that number, then I want to start putting a documented process in place around it and starting to train and scale that up across my team. But before that, for me personally, in the businesses I've been in, it's felt way too early before that.
Awesome. So yeah, a couple key takeaways I think I'm hearing, just to summarize for everyone. Sales process is far beyond, and I think everyone would agree with this, it's far beyond just that new business evaluation and contract signing. It's about how do you make the customer successful across the board, from a lot of product like growth now and CS teams and AMs and all of that kind of stuff. Totally agree. And then yes, documenting and building repeatable process is important, but like early product development, you want to make sure you're staying agile and have the core thing figured out with that first, whether it's 10, 20, 30 customers, some subset of folks that you're saying the same thing to get them interested, sell them product impact before you really invest in building out that team and documenting everything. Because you get a lot less agile after that point. So that's awesome. Cool. Well, to get some other thoughts on this, Tom, what does the sales process mean to you, and different stages?
Yeah, well said, Sid. Stole some of my thunder, as I'm sure we all will as we go through this. But no, a couple key points. I think you touched on something that's really important to me, which is first, you have to understand what a successful sales process means to your company and team. And as you go through different stages and phases of your company, to answer the second part of the question, Ross, how much does it depend? It depends a lot. And I think to me, it's the iteration depending on what stage you're at, right? Sid's obviously done this with a lot of companies that are scaling, up. And so from that perspective, you need to make sure you're constantly iterating and figuring it out. For me as well, and in my career, I think a repeatable sales process, it should be something everybody wants to follow and everybody thinks can help propel them to achieve their goals. I think oftentimes as sales leaders, you can have a good idea as to what's going to work or what's not going to work. But I think sales process kind of has this stigma amongst AEs sometimes as something that isn't maybe amazing to follow. So I don't know, right now in this webinar, maybe we just change it, sales process. Let's find a different phrase or something, right? But no, seriously, it's I think it's really important to get everyone to buy in, and everyone should understand the value of it and how it's going to help affect their lives and careers and everything from there.
That's such a good point. And that's so funny. It comes up all the time, with Accord, we're helping people, document and reinforce the sales process. And we'll talk to, maybe it's sales ops or a VP of sales or someone that isn't in the trenches like an AE, and they're stoked about the process that they built. And then we talk to an AE and they're like, oh, we built this template for you, check it out. And they're like, this isn't at all what the team does to be successful. We actually do these things and we skip this usually and blah, blah, blah. And I think it has created a stigma around, I think leadership teams want to feel like this is the structure of it and can kind of get far away from what's actually happening. And the visibility into what those steps are sometimes is broken down when you just see it on Salesforce and exit criteria that really dive into what's really happening. So that's resonates a ton, Tom. So last but not least, Michaela, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, and super great insights from both Sid and Tom and you, Ross. And just to add more to that and distill it at the super high level, when I think about this repeatable sales process, it's really when you've identified that consistently successful selling motion to close deals. And to Tom and Sid's point, as you grow and scale, you can iterate that over time. But both Sid and Tom mentioned this concept that everyone can follow. And I just kind of want to tap more into what everyone means. And when I think about a repeatable sales process, it's one that everyone in an organization can align to, whether you're sales, solutions engineering, teams in other regions or completely different time zones, because over time, different teams start to sell a little differently. And even thinking about those post-sales teams, account management, how things get handed off to onboarding. And when you start defining what this repeatable process is, and even as you iterate, you can start to build frameworks, trainings, onboarding, and even align it to something like a CRM to start to formalize that and still continue to adjust over time. And stage is a super important factor. The earlier you are, the more it's still going to be a work in progress. And I think it'd be super unrealistic to be like, hey, you're a seed stage company and you've got, your repeatable sales process ironed out. I think by the time you're at B and like hyper scaling, you want to make sure that it's super top of mind as you're hiring, you're growing. How can you set all these people that you're bringing onto your company up for success and in a way that scales, that reduces human hours and really takes the burden off of tribal knowledge to make that training and onboarding around the process a reality.
Totally. Yeah. And that reminds me of my time at Stripe when we were going from, basically 3 folks, closing deals out of Zendesk and User Voice to building out this whole team across multiple geos and segments. And during that, like you mentioned, hypergrowth stage, we were investing so much on bringing more people, but I feel like we missed that because it was so growth focused. We missed that part where we're actually documenting it on each of those new segments and products where everyone coming on had to spend 9+ months ramping up. And we saw the impact in terms of how long, it took folks to ramp. I think we had an average of 18 months, even in mid-market for a long time, which is wild when you think about it. You could probably half as many people, and if it was a 9-month ramp curve, you'd make the same impact. So, and I love your point about, it's not just, again, the AE, it's across SEs and a million other folks that are involved in deals, especially as, we've been talking a lot about at Accord multi-stakeholder in terms of the buyer, but I think you're seeing, especially with more kind of customizable solutions like that each one of you have sold, there's a lot of internal coordination between a number of folks that go into closing even mid-market or upper mid-market deals. So,
Michaela, I have a quick question. You're on the solutions engineering side. When you think of sales processes at Front and Salesforce before, did you guys have like a separate sales process just for the SEs and the parts of the deals that they managed, or did you guys kind of train up the whole org as this is the sales process across the org and here's what everybody's individual roles and responsibilities within that process or pieces of ownership are?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we don't have separate processes. In fact, like solutions engineering and the sales org should be tightly aligned throughout the core steps of the sales process. And this was both at Salesforce and at Front. And I think it's super important, and we've done this at both companies, where the entire organization is enabled on all of the stages in the funnel, from when deals are getting sourced to when it's getting handed off to the AEs to when the SEs come in, and what are the key steps that we focus on and partner on and own as part of that process, all the way to close. And in us knowing, like as a solutions engineer, all these parts and steps of the sales process, it also allows us to partner and challenge the sales reps that we work with in asking additional questions. How we ask these questions? Do we know this information? In addition to being very operationally minded individuals. So I'm a big believer that if you train your solutions engineers on the right process, and then when your salespeople bring the SEs in, by nature, when your SEs are doing the right process, it's a forcing function to make sure that the salespeople are doing the right steps all the way to close, especially if they're new. Oftentimes, we're helping to enable them and train them in this like indirect but direct way throughout that deal partnership.
I totally agree. We did the same thing at Trey as well. It was one process. Different people are primary contributors at different parts of it. Like the SEs were always the driver of the process at times during the POC stages. But I totally agree with all the points you laid out there.
One thought I had too, great points, Michaela and Sid, is one thing that was really helpful for me is to kind of have like a mission statement or an overall North Star or goal that the whole team and company is driving towards from sales motions. So for example, at Five9, being a leader in the space, a company that's been around for quite some time, public company, et cetera, for us, our North Star is we always have to get our prospects to think we have the best product and best team in the industry. Right? If we don't do that because of the prices that we sell at, we will lose every time because it's very competitive and there's lots of other folks. So I think with, like you said, Michaela, the alignment across the organization of this North Star and goal, for me, helps framework, all right, this is how my sales process is then going to all drive towards us. And at the end of the day, it's all winning deals. But I think for every company, every stage, how you're going to win is going to be a little bit different as well.
So I think that ties in super well. Just looking at a couple questions here to hit on before we go to the next kind of guided question here. Jonathan, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, Sworka, had an awesome question, kind of insight into how sales, the general word, kind of becoming a lot of things right now in the age of SaaS, when you have free trials and proofs of content and freemium and land and expand and versus maximizing ACV initially. Thoughts on building this process across the entire company? I think everything that I'm hearing is kind of, not just at the sales organizational level, like you're talking, Tom, but like a company level guiding principle of like, what is the thing that from a product and go-to-market perspective across our branding, across thought leadership, across when they talk to a rep the first time, when they use a product the first time, reinforcing something, some vision, mission about the company, I think is becoming more and more important, because it's not just these like, it's not these separate touch points, right? It's integrated into the product experience. And I think that's kind of been a really interesting learning starting a Cord now has been like, oh, what we message on our site and outbound needs to be exactly what we talked about in the demo and that proof point. And then when they go to the product, we need to reinforce that. And it's so not just, what the SE team's focused on, the sales team and customer success, it all needs to be super integrated in a way that I don't think it ever has had to be. So I think that's, been really interesting. And Jonathan, I don't know the answer to the question. I think we're all figuring it out, but I think making sure that you have not just like mini team visions and missions. I think we've seen that before. Like the CS team is so separate from implementation, which is separate from SE's. You need to have, stand-ups. The way you run your company needs to have shared goals and everyone kind of going in the same direction a lot more than I think what you had to have in the past to be successful. So it's the only thoughts I could share there. And also, Tom, I know you were super early days with Ryan at that. What was that company called? I think you'd be a great person. Yeah, Storybox. I think you'd be an awesome person maybe to answer Jake's question around being in the trenches as an AE, but your leadership team isn't necessarily wanting to build a process early on. Curious to get your thoughts on, do you just kind of go with the flow and try to figure things out yourself? How do you think about that as a rep in those early days? Yeah,
it's a tough one. I think first off though, initial question, this is like a typical objection handling in sales. Rather than handle it right away, I think I would respond with a question and ask them, well, why aren't they bought into the sales process, right? Kind of start where we started and ask them, what does a sales process mean to you? And how do you think that it could benefit, or why are we not focusing on it now, right? Once you do that discovery and you can understand how your leadership team is thinking, they may bring up good points as to why they don't think it's ready. Or you may be able to then convince them as to why. In reality, there's probably a middle ground. And to me, some of it comes back to just this phrase of sales process that has stigma, and some people think is one thing, but others think it's something else. And then of course, just to go through and, help them understand the values. I think especially early stage, the key value is onboarding, right? Ross, on that, like at Stripe, you need to get a process in place so that you can get people ramped up sooner than later. If that's all your quote unquote sales process is in the beginning, I think that is incredibly valuable.
Awesome. I love how meta we're getting here. Like, I love, people talk a lot about like sales helping in other areas of your life, even dealing with, and that was something I feel like I didn't do early in my career too. I was very frustrated sometimes at like, why aren't we doing this way? And I'd like, this is the way I think. And I didn't step back. Okay, maybe there's stuff I don't know and should really kind of better understand. Maybe they don't have the information that I have and I just need to share this one thing, and then the light bulb goes off and they're like, okay, we should do it this way. Or maybe vice versa. I'm not seeing something. So it's a really great place to start.
I think to Tom's point too, Jake, like part of you being an early stage AE, like part of your mandate is to come to the table with extra solutions as well, right? Because to Ross's point, you and your team of two other AEs are the ones on the front lines hearing all of the feedback from what's working and what's not. Like it's your job to bring all that learning back to the table and say, here's what we're saying, here's what we've been trained to say, here's how what results that resulting in. What if we try it this way? Or I tried it this way and here are the results I got from it. Maybe we try tweaking the process a bit. And so I think that's why a lot of people go to early stage companies, right? Because then they don't feel like they're given a massive 100-page notebook of like, hey, here's what the sales process is. Go rinse and repeat this every day. And it's more of a creative process, right? Where you're getting the chance to go in and put your own flair to it and figure out what's actually working and what's not, and bring that back to the business so the rest of your team can be successful too.
And just to add a little bit more to that, to bring everything full circle, I think to the topic of this specific point is that it's always okay to ask questions and sort of challenge the status quo of the way that you're doing things. And to Tom and Sid's point of like documenting what you've tried and what hasn't worked, like that's a proof point in addition to the proof points for what has actually worked, and sharing the feedback from the field. I mean, something that we do a really great job of at Front is all of our leaders, from our CRO to VPs of sales to managers, are always talking to people in the field. And whether you're an individual contributor or a leader at the highest level at your organization, I'd always encourage that level of feedback and challenge on what's working, what's not, and what you're always seeing and hearing from your customers.
Totally. Yeah, no, these are fantastic points. I was worried about not having enough questions, but we're absolutely, I think the panel, please keep them coming in this chat. These questions are far better than the ones that I wrote down before to guide the conversation. So appreciate everyone jumping in. Let's see if there's any. Oh, yes, this is a great question. I swear after this one, we'll get to the next kind of guided one, but would love to hear, this is awesome because we're talking a lot about kind of the vision of it and how you should do it, but KPIs, the impact, I think that's an awesome place to kind of round this out with. Would love to hear about KPIs as the glue for trying out models. I'm guessing that's kind of like the sales, another way of saying the bad word of sales process here. Yeah, I think, and maybe for earlier stage companies, this might be tricky because you're iterating so much and every deal looks slightly different. Looking at the time it takes to close a deal and move from stage to stage, if you have a CRM, is my kind of like the most objective way I think you can understand what's working. And the KPI, like just seeing, hey, deals that were this ACV that used to take this long are now taking this long. A lot of the stuff is going to be qualitative. I just find, oh, wow, we did, we used to set the expectation that we needed a pilot to start, but now we're saying that's optional and costs money. How is that impacting the deal? Is it accelerating things, or is it bringing in more stakeholders, et cetera? A lot of the stuff is going to be very qualitative and requires, kind of Jonathan's point, like everything being integrated, the product team and other leaders being really close to those first few AEs and having that just open dialogue all the time, because things are changing week to week, month to month, as you're testing out different pricing and packaging and positioning. But I'm also definitely not the KPI person, so I'll throw it out. I know, Michaela, you're super rigorous when it comes to operations. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like ways that you potentially track building this repeatable process.
Yes, I love thinking about operational rigor. I think Salesforce or any CRM, we use Salesforce, obviously from Salesforce, but any CRM, and thinking about at least, the minimum level of data points that you actually want to be able to track. And this could be thinking about breaking it down, inbound versus outbound. Is it a product-led sales cycle, meaning they come inbound from trials, and like, what's that conversion? Is it a sales-led motion where even if it was inbound or outbound, and then once they're in that sales-led motion, is it a demo only to close? Are they in a trial? Are they doing a paid pilot? And then as you begin to mature and you loop in, solution engineers, and you think about implementing, let's say, a deal support request process, and you track engagement of other stakeholders on these deals, you can start to think about all these different factors, but then also look at when deals get closed, lost at certain stage. Why is that? Are you identifying specific trends? At what stage, were different stakeholders involved? So there's a lot that you can do with that data, but I'll also let Sid and Tom chime in on what they're seeing.
Yeah, I think this ties into the question, Aaron Smith, that you also asked around just how do you measure if the process is actually working or not. And I think to Michaela's point, you really, especially after it's just the founder and 1AE, and once you start scaling that team out, you got to rely on the data. And I think the easiest way, right, to your point, Michaela, how do you know if something's broken is if you're not getting the result you want, and if it looks like there's a clear point in the funnel, right, in the funnel being your sales process, where things are dropping off, right, whether it be the POC stages aren't converting at a high enough rate, or negotiations aren't converting at a high enough rate, or whatever it may be. You got to look with a fine-tooth comb of exactly what part of the process are things breaking down on, and why might that be, right? And so what I've always done is, when I've noticed that, hey, maybe our discovery to POC rate isn't as high as we want it to be, you go in and you start looking at a lot of those calls, right? I think that's why tools like Gong and stuff are so helpful now, is because it really helps you dig into the strategy of the deal and understand, is the AE missing something between the line? Am I missing something between the lines? Is the customer missing something? Why is this not transitioning? And as you go through and maybe listen to 20 or 30 of them, you will hopefully start to notice a common theme that you can address, right? And then it's just iteration, right? You notice something that's broken, that's not working, you try something else. All right, is this improving it? Is it making it worse? No. And you just keep trying until you start to find a common path, right? I mean, I think it would be great if the sales process was something that you're like, oh, this is how the deal happened, and we're just going to rinse and repeat this 500 times, and then we're going to IPO in 8 years, and it's going to be good. But that's really not how it works, right? I think it is very much an iterative process where you keep failing, you keep some things work, some things don't work, some things get better, some things don't, and you just kind of keep figuring out the next path, right? The next step. And so for me, that's what's always helped for me. And what's also been interesting that I've noticed is that a sales process that works one year may be very different the next year, right? And it may not work the same way the following year because competitors may be doing something else, or the market is doing something else, or if you're trying to go to a different vertical, it may not work the same way in that vertical as the current vertical you're having success in. So every time you're trying to change a variable, you should always also go back and look at the sales process and see, hey, is that actually stacking up well with this new variable as well as it was previously?
Love that.
Bit of a rant, but hopefully that was helpful for some people out there.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, you two are so knowledgeable about this. I'll try to provide some value. The way I would look at it is also just, it is really good to look at it across trends of your sales organization, no matter what stage you're at. I'd also say, though, take it as a very rep by rep focus too, and identify those KPIs and metrics that lead to whatever your objective is. So for us, it's probably going to be, closed won deals, ACV, et cetera, and then boil down those metrics: close rate, sales cycle, ACV per deal, win rate against top competitors, and actually look at that for every single AE you have on your team. You'll, for the top performers, identify what's working. You can learn from them, iterate that amongst, tying it back to your sales process. And then for those folks that aren't doing well, hopefully you can level them up and continue to get them to improve, but you also may have insights from them that you can disperse amongst the team too. So I think as a leader, it's always kind of fun to think very holistically about the business. But as I've gotten more and more into it, I continue to go back to working individually with reps and figuring out how they can improve those KPIs.
Awesome. Well, I love this. I'm going to let you guys just talk for the rest of it because this is fantastic. Switching gears for a second. Oh, sorry,
go ahead, Rob. I was just going to say, one other thing that may be helpful too is for me and my teams, it was always very helpful, like kind of this distinction of, is the sales process like the pill that cures everything or not? And it's really not, right? It's really just a set of guide rails to help you have a more repeatable process, but it's not the golden bullet. I think like the way I always think of the sales process is like this distinction of tactics and strategies, right? So tactics are, you're blocking and tackling, this is what you message, this is what pricing looks like. If they say X, you go Y. And then strategy is the overarching themes of the deal, right? Like if you look at like a framework like MEDDIC, for example, like what is the overarching pain? What is the overarching initiatives that the company has going on? What are they trying to do, right, at a more strategic level? And how do you tie those tactics into the more strategic aspects of the deal? And I think, for anytime you're working with, if you're a manager, you're working with your AEs, or if you're an AE, you're working with your manager, like the more time you can spend not on the sales process stuff, right? If you could pick that up on your own and pick it up through onboarding and understand the blocking and tackling, and you can get that down because that's just controlled by effort, right? You can put in the effort and learn that stuff. The strategy stuff is really where I think what I've noticed that's what separates the best reps from the middle of the pack, is the people that are able to understand at a more strategic level, like, hey, here are all the tools that the process gives me, but here's how I tie them into this specific deal. And these are all the people internally within my organization that I need to engage or pull in order to help me get the outcome I need on this deal. And so, I think there's two parts, right, to coaching a team and building these teams. One is the tactics and the process, and the other part is the strategic piece, right, which is you're only going to get it by like digging into the meaty details of the deal and having an overarching framework like MEDDIC or something similar that you're relating everything back to.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary of actually both of the first questions that we've talked about, is like, what is the sales process? I love how you frame that as like, it's the guardrails, it's the framework for tying the company strategy and all the big kind of points we're talking about with Jonathan's question to what you do with customers. And then it becomes that rep's experience, the coaching from the manager or team or SEs or other people that are working the deal, to translate that into what you're doing with the customer. And I think see both sides of this. You see very little sales process and a huge focus on coaching, or you see stick to this and that's all that matters because this is what you're doing on the deal, right? And this is what you're doing with the customer. And that's a really good way of framing what we're talking about, or what I think sales process should be, which is this framework which ties together all the learnings, the product stuff, where you fit in the market to how you're dealing with customers. And then it's it's kind of the mix of the art and science of sales, right? The science is the framework and the sales process. The art is all the coaching and what you're doing with the customer and the fun stuff. Yeah. Awesome. So to jump around a bit, because I know people are really interested in seeing what this looks like in real life and kind of moving from these ideas to practice. What are some companies today that you think are a great North Star for creating this 10 out of 10 sales process for leaders or founders or anyone at the organization, even AEs that are trying to bring and up-level the team? I can maybe start with an example here. I actually had I posted this on LinkedIn, and I think there's not enough, I was going to ask actually what the biggest mistakes are, but I feel like there's some great people to learn from. I had this awesome experience with a new company. I think they're just a Series A company, remote.com, for setting up. We hired someone out in Canada. We're a US based company, had to figure that out. And, classic, like, it's great to be in the buyer's shoes to kind of, reflect on all the stuff we're talking about. It's like, okay, did my research first, asked a couple of other folks that have been in my shoes, the referenceable customers in my space. I went online, did a few Google searching, saw some blog posts, saw a couple names come up consistently, building trust there. And then I reached out to 3 companies. And this also ties well into like the world that we're living in, which is also very product led at the same time of talking to actual sales reps. The experience that I just separated me from the start, my first interaction with the companies, and especially remote, was, and it's funny, this kind of ties into tooling like HubSpot. I was allowed to book my time the next morning with a HubSpot link instead of sending in the demo request, which we do. So I'm like, okay, we need to change this immediately. Through their calendar. So I had the time booked. I didn't need to reach out and get back to you really quickly with the rep, kind of go back and forth. It's just like, boom, I wanted to talk to someone, brought on an awesome person, chatted with them, followed up immediately. I think that was just such a big separator to me than even just like the small difference, the tiny difference. And that's how they got my business versus sending an email, even though they got back to me quickly. So curious to hear who you think are, great examples or more tactical examples like that of building a sales process that, is the right thing in 2021. So maybe to direct this, I'll direct it to Michaela to start.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that I think about this, and I mean, I'm as a solutions engineer, I'm not typically on like the front lines of purchasing a lot of software, so I don't have as much experience like dealing with these other companies. But then also a lot of my experience comes from the forefront with Salesforce, and Salesforce truly has an amazing, at like a super high level, like the way that they run their sales process coupled with sales methodology, and they're truly amazing at what they do from a sales perspective. When I moved to San Francisco and was at a startup, I was like, I want to go to Salesforce to learn sales and understanding sales in general in any role, no matter what your role is in the sales process, is incredibly important. And the frameworks that they have coupled with value selling and with a focal point of customer success. So I know we've been talking a lot around just like the bare bones of like frameworks and steps, but this aligns back to like that mission driven like goal of that process that Tom, you brought up at the beginning. And I think one of the things that Salesforce does super well, which I really admire and think about a lot, you know, at front, every company I interact with, is the way that they treat their customers as a part of that process, and that the customer success is our success. And if you ingrain that as part of every step of the deal cycle, from their first interaction, the experience, in addition to the steps that you take them through, I think at the end of the day, if the customer has a great experience, which is half the battle, then you're off to the right foot to close the deal. Yeah,
that's a great call out. I know, you know, now Salesforce has been around for a while and they pioneered a lot of this stuff, but yeah, foundationally, the obsession over the customer is going to lead. Yeah, it's going to be that great North Star mission for the rest of the company and sales org. Awesome. Sid, what are your thoughts?
I agree 1,000% with what Michaela said. I think everything starts and ends with your customers, the deals you sell, and how successful those customers actually are. I know your question, Ross, was, are there specific companies that we think do a really good job on it?
Yeah.
Obviously, Salesforce is Salesforce because they have such a great process as well. So they're an obvious one. I think a lot of it also depends on what your go-to-market motion is, right? If you look at companies that are more product-driven sales, right? I think Stripe and Twilio are like the cream of the crop there in terms of how they identify those cohorts of customers, right, at scale that their sales team should be reaching out to and upselling and expanding. I think in a more traditional sales methodology, that's not more product-led growth. I think one of the last sales processes I've been intimately involved in purchasing, right, or in the evaluation process, was Gong a few years ago. And they actually did a phenomenal job throughout the process of just from understanding pain, like going deeper than just surface level pain and really understanding what was going on in the business. Why was this important? Tying everything back to metrics, tying each of those metrics and each of our pain points to customer references that we could be speaking with. And I think one of the big things, to your point, Ross, that you touched on earlier in terms of like how our jobs as salespeople has changed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. All the information that people want about your product, they're not going to get it from talking to an AE anymore. They get it online. They get it from going through your website, your blogs, talking to other customers. And our job as salespeople is less to be, up there in front of the room as a charismatic speaker and getting people to buy and sign a big check. It's really more about being like a really strategic consultant and digging into their business needs and tying it back to like how your solution actually helps on those business needs, right? And so what I found, right, is that being less of like a super, like the classic interpretation of like what a salesperson is, which is just like, really smooth talking and blah, 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 right? And just actually being someone that's like a normal person that they can just talk to and understand like, hey, this is something that helps. This is something that doesn't. This is where we're going to be good for you. This is where we're not. That always helps in the long run, right? And I've constantly seen it at all the companies that I've been at and all the teams that I've helped to manage. Like the top salespeople are oftentimes the quiet ones and the ones that going into the meeting, like they're the ones that are just really good at getting customers trust. And this is doubly or triply true if you're selling to product or engineering roles. If they sniff that you are salesy, like you will probably not get many emails returned back from them. And so, I mean, that's what I've noticed that a lot of sales teams do. Like you never feel like you're being sold to, right? You just kind of feel like you're being taught about a product or about a space and how your company would be able to implement that.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's great examples there.
One I throw in too is people AI. We recently just went through that evaluation process. And I wasn't necessarily the buyer from an evaluation perspective or from a budgetary perspective, but they did such a good job of and getting more tactical about sales process. They did such a good job of evaluating all the different stakeholders that were involved in the process and reaching out to them and understanding what's important. So while I wasn't involved, I had someone reach out to me. They had a very thoughtful first initial email that got me to respond. They wanted to pick my brain, understand my pain points, and then they were able to distribute that amongst the other folks involved in the sales process. So it was a good combination of like team selling and identifying different stakeholders that, I thought it was a good process overall.
Wow. I don't know how I haven't done that before in large deals, but like have other people that might maybe not even be driving the deal to reach out to other stakeholders in a thoughtful, you already have the warm intro because you're talking to the leadership team. You want to be helpful to your team who might be making this decision to make sure your thoughts are taken into account for this purchase. That is brilliant. Yeah. With like multi-stakeholder team selling. And then a lot of the time, because I think about that job as like, hey, I have to ask my champion or the other people to get that feedback, or they're going to, and then it's like slower process. Who knows how the conversation is going to go, how they're going to frame those questions. They might not get the information they need, or it's, kind of not clearly articulated. Whereas if you do it yourself, it takes away that job of the main buyer that you're working with, adding a ton of value in the process. So that's definitely a big takeaway. I'm going to have to think about how we can do that more effectively.
And just on that note, I know we've been talking a lot about like the new business sales process, and Sid, and actually you mentioning Gong, I have a really great story from like a world-class expansion motion that I saw from them reaching out to our team. And it ties back to like really caring about the customer and being consultative. Our account manager at Gong had actually reached out to a bunch of SEs like myself on the team to hear about like our experience, the way that we're using the product, gathering feedback. And then based off of those data points, actually reached out to our head of all solutions with value points, because we don't have full licenses. We just listen to Gong recordings at this point, and then came to her with a bunch of data points for how they help teams like ours solve that exact need. And it was an absolutely brilliant sales motion on the expansion side.
That's really.
And if you look at any team that's successfully or any company that's successfully selling to sales organizations, that's a good place to start too, right? Because you have the highest bar. So great point.
Yeah, I feel that when we're selling to sales teams, it's like use a cord to sell better. It's like, oh man, we better bring our A game, because like the promise is to do something better. We better not, be messing around. So super spot on. All right, so we're coming up on the last 10 or so minutes. Let's talk, more tactically now. How do you go about doing this? So let's pick a specific stage and stuff so we can get super tactical here. Let's say you are, kind of the main decision makers. Let's say, CEO and first sales leader, go-to-market leader at a Series A company. They've been successful. They maybe have, 5 to 10 customer-facing folks between, CSMs, SEs, AEs, and you're about to, hit this inflection point. You're going from those 5, 10 to 25 by the end of the year, hopefully, 50, 100, et cetera, over the next couple of years. How do you think about taking those, let's call it like first 2 to 3 steps of making sure you're at that place that can onboard new reps effectively, collaborate with customers in a way they want to work with you, make sure you're successful across not just sales, but onboarding success? Curious to hear how you would think about kind of chunking up that work and making that happen. So, Tom, what do you think? What would be your first steps there? What would be your the first things you do in a quarter to think about how to make that happen?
Yeah. Ooh. All right. I would say, so first, a very basic, but you can get a lot from it, is if you haven't identified your specific sales stages, I would highly recommend doing that. Most can be boiled down into some kind of discovery, demo, proposal, technical buy-in, executive about, mutual agreement on pricing, et cetera. But I think aligning those stages for me, when I was building an onboarding process and sales process at Five9, when I first got here, The first way I did it was through those different stages, and then just clearly going through and saying, what's the goal of every single stage? What are you trying to accomplish? And then from there, creating a whole framework as to how you go out and you accomplish that goal. I think it's just a really easy way, like you said, Ross, to chunk it into different areas, have a clear goal, and then from there you go execute on that goal and help them understand how to accomplish it. And then from there, I'd say also just getting some technology in place to ensure that you're documenting it properly and you can constantly iterate on it. I mean, if you're at that stage, like, you shouldn't just go back to, let's say, your onboarding process or your sales process when you have a new rep or you're going to do a team training. I would always make that document a living and breathing piece of work. So I'd be in the middle of work or in the one-on-one and I'd say, oh, that's a great idea. I need to actually change that because, like, my sales process says this and I actually just told my rep this and it's totally different. So it really has to take commitment to always keeping it up to date and not just something that you can point to and say, here's our sales process. But yeah, I think starting in stages is probably a good first step.
Totally agree. And yes, very hard to do, but the right thing is to, like, how do you keep that living and breathing? I think that's why, that there's that disconnect sometimes between the leadership team and ops team that writes it down and the reps, right? So awesome points. Sid, what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom hit a lot of it, right? In terms of what I would do as well. I think it all starts with, because Ross, your premise was you have 4 or 5 customers right now and you're the CEO or head of sales, right? And I think being able to make sure that you know what you're documenting, right? And you're not just creating a process for process sake is really important, right? And making sure that, to Tom's point, these stages that you're making or in anything else you're doing to build this early process is actually the right thing to put in place at the beginning. Because like I said earlier, like, I think you need 30, 40 customers to really have a good sense of what your process is. And you need to see that repeatable success. And before you see that, I would not actually document way too much. I would have kind of guide rails around, here's generally how we think we run the deal. We only have 5 so far, so we don't maybe know everything yet, but we're going to hear the different things we're going to experiment on, and we're going to make sure that we set up the structure right so that we're able to collect data of what's working and what's not, and we're not just going off of what everybody's gut feeling is, but we actually have data that's driving our decisions of what is working and what's not. And once we get to 20, 30, 40 customers, then let's start looking at, like, taking a pen to paper and actually writing out all of these stages, because now we have a good understanding of how we get customers and how we grow them. Now we just need to go out and get more of those, right? So as I'm going out and hiring, I think you said 50 or 100 AEs over the next couple of years, now I have, like, a process that I can bring them into, coach them on, and help them scale up. And one other thing that may be helpful that I've noticed for, if there are any founders here or very early stage or AEs who report into the CEO, is, it sounds weird, but it is actually easier for the CEO to sell deals than an AE, even if the CEO is technical or a non-salesperson. And that's just because, people like buying from visionaries, right, or people leading companies. And so anytime, like, if you're an AE and you're like, God, my CEO is closing every deal he's in and I'm closing every other one, like, that's you're still probably doing pretty well, right? And so, the gold standard, just because you're the CEO and you're like, hey, all this stuff is working for me, why is it not working for everybody else? It could mean a bunch of different things, right? It doesn't mean that you have a process that's easily repeatable, because you can't repeat yourself as a CEO going out, and that doesn't scale, right? And so
that's an awesome point. That's such a good point. I think people think that they might have product market fit from either, like, a lead generating perspective, if it's the CEO doing stuff, versus a random person that is going to be what your business is going to be based on, or closing those deals. I think we're seeing that now. We just brought on our first 2 go-to-market hires who've been awesome. They've been doing, I think, because I was not doing an awesome job of being as responsive, like, there's the other side to it as well, though, why it could be beneficial. And actually you could see almost like a even numbers of, like, the response times and also and, like, actually spend the time with the customers. So good thing to look out for. So Michaela, what would be your approach to that?
Yes. I mean, first off, I think it couldn't have been said better by Tom and Sid. Just to add to that, I mean, first and foremost, no doubt you're absolutely going to start with having your basic stages before you actually build out like frameworks around those things. And when you get to a point where you're like, hey, we really want to iron this out, start documenting these things, building that framework, and you haven't yet. It's been tribal knowledge. People have been successful, but you haven't really come together. I'd say get your key stakeholders, your leaders, your ICs, your individual contributors that are on the field closing deals in a room or on a Zoom, talk about the trends that they're seeing that are working for them. Get alignment as a group. And then based off of those identified trends and alignment, then you can start, just simple outlining the steps. And, as those steps are working, you can start building out more details in each step of the process, who's responsible, etc. But I think you can start super simple, as Sid was talking about, from the stages like Tom, all the way to eventually building out that more robust, repeatable framework for scale.
Totally. So we got a couple more minutes. I would love to also hear maybe like a 20-second soundbite on common mistakes that you've seen or to imagine, the CEO that's making that transition from founder-led to sales leader, that first sales leader implementing this. What do you think would be a common mistake? In my mind, what I've seen is too much documentation. It's a classic thing that reps do to customers is, you want to be as helpful as possible. You want to guide them. And it's like, here's everything. Here's the deck and the 2 case studies that I mentioned and this, and send to this person. It's like, oh my God. Okay. Instantly, I'm going to do that tomorrow morning because I don't have time to, to respond to that today. That's exactly what's going to happen to your process. It's going to sit on the shelf like I think 90+% of processes do. So that would be my quick soundbite on what not to do. Start as light as possible. Wins, iterate, MVP. But yeah, maybe we'll go in reverse order. Michaela, Tom, Sid here.
Yeah, I'd say on the complete opposite end of the spectrum is thinking that you can scale a repeatable sales process through tribal knowledge. I've seen companies try to do it without like really writing anything down or aligning people around a base framework aside from like, we all know this and we all know this is our process. But again, that doesn't scale.
I'd say not getting feedback and buy-in from the reps. It's easy to have ideas in your mind about what works, what has worked, what you've seen previously, but actually getting everyone to buy into it, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, I think we could have another hour session just on how you get people to adopt the sales process that you put in place. But I think Miguel and Tom hit on the head, right? And I think in addition to that is just making sure that you have that you're confident in the process that you're documenting, because early on, maybe you don't have that many customer conversations going. You don't have as many deals coming in and you're like, oh man, like, am I on the hot seat? Am I going to be let go? I got to look like I'm busy, got to look like I'm contributing value. Like I'm going to go write up this 10-page Word doc on what our process should be. And it could be a massive, massive, colossal waste of time, right? And so making sure that you actually are paying attention to the things that matter. And secondly, that if you have some standout AEs or standout people on your team that are actually able to go out and are consistently closing deals and progressing deals, like go sit with them on their calls, right? And understand what are they doing that the other players on your team are not, and what are the nuggets of things that you can expand on or that you should just copy as is, and start to have them help you, right? Have them, bring them in as a stakeholder with you, your top reps, to help you shape out the sales process early on, right? Because that will help them feel like they're having more ownership as well. And it'll also help them to have their antenna to be not just, hey, how do I as an individual contributor go out and close a bunch of deals and beat my quota, but also like, what am I doing as a top contributor that's working, and how can I help my leader put together a framework that we can coach the rest of the team on so everyone does great and it's not just me. And so I think that that's also something that I don't see enough companies really taking advantage of, because some of the most valuable people on these early stage companies are the frontline reps, who are the actual ones talking to customers and hearing why people are hanging up on them or why people are buying every day, right? And there's so much knowledge in those people, and being able to just sit with them and understand, like get their straight feedback of what's working and what's not, is one of the most valuable things.
For sure. This is great. Well, hopefully it's helpful. I just want to give I can't believe there's people that are, spending their time, making their time to up-level themselves and their companies. So shout out to everyone who made it, who is listening to the recording now. something I always try to make time for, but it's challenging. So awesome for you for learning more about this and digging in, whether or not you're a career sales rep or leader or CEO trying to figure this out for the first time. If you want to chat with any of us, feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. Send a note if you want to jam. We live for this kind of stuff, which is why we got this crew together, and it was such a great conversation. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. Obviously I have to shout out Accord for a second here, because that is the folks sponsoring it. So again, Ross Rich, CEO and Accord, if you want to talk about things like how to build a repeatable sales process, collaborate better with your customer, we're helping folks move from vendorship to partnership, and that is also the name of our blog. If you don't want to talk to me, but you want to keep following what we're doing, feel free to subscribe to our blog. Our website is inaccord.com, and you can keep in touch. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'm sure you have a million emails and Slacks and whatever to get back to everyone on the panel, so I'll let you do that. But thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your hard-earned wisdom with the rest of the community here.